The sun dipped low over the small southern town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across its cobblestone streets. This was a place where time seemed to stand still, its picturesque exterior hiding fractures in its foundation, fractures formed by history, inequality, and silence. For 17-year-old Marcus Green, Willow Creek was a mix of home and unease. As the youngest of 3 siblings, Marcus had always been the dreamer of the family. His bedroom walls were covered in sketches of buildings he longed to create, designs that spoke of innovation and beauty. But for Marcus, dreams often felt weighed down by reality. "It's not just bricks and mortar, son," his father, Samuel, often said. "You've got to build yourself strong before you can build anything else." Willow Creek High was known for its gleaming trophy cases and ivy-covered walls, a school where tradition reigned. But for Marcus, it was also a daily battlefield. As one of the few black students, he often felt like an outsider, navigating unwritten rules and unspoken tensions. As the first week of his senior year began, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that change was on the horizon. His father's parting words that morning lingered in his mind. "Stay sharp, stay steady, people will always try to knock you down." The first bell rang, cutting through the humid morning air, as students hurried to their lockers. Marcus weaved through the crowd, a sketchbook tucked under his arm. Ellie, his best friend, was already waiting at his locker. "Hey, future architect," Ellie said, her red curls bouncing as she waved. "Ready for the madness?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, opening his locker. The sound of laughter drew their attention. Down the hall, Greg Stanton, the star quarterback, was holding court with his friends. Greg's booming voice filled the corridor as he tossed a football to one of his teammates. "Another year of domination," Greg declared, smirking. "State champs, here we come." "Do they ever shut up?" Ellie muttered. Marcus chuckled but kept his eyes on his locker. "They're just noise." But as they walked to class, Marcus could feel Greg's gaze on him, a sharp, lingering stare that felt like a warning. Mr. Harper's history class was a blend of monotony and occasional sparks of interest. Today the topic was Reconstruction, a chapter in American history that often felt more like a wound than a lesson. Reconstruction was a complex time, Mr. Harper began, pacing in front of the whiteboard. It promised a new start for the country, but it also brought resistance. Let's talk about why. Marcus sat near the back, taking notes, but his mind was elsewhere. The room hummed with whispered conversations, and he could feel the subtle undercurrent of tension. "Let me guess," Greg said loudly from his seat near the front, smirking. "They messed it up because people wanted too much too fast." A few students laughed nervously. Marcus looked up, his pen hovering over his notebook. "Mr. Stanton," Mr. Harper said, his tone sharp, "I expect thoughtful contributions in this class." Greg leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Just saying, some things can't be rushed." Marcus's hand shot up, surprising even himself. Or maybe it's because people didn't want change. They wanted to hold on to power. The room fell silent. Greg's grin faltered, replaced by a glare. "Care to elaborate, Mr. Green?" Mr. Harper asked, intrigued. Marcus took a deep breath. "It's easier to blame people trying to move forward than to admit the system was built to keep them down." Greg rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath. Mr. Harper raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. The bell rang and students shuffled out, leaving an air of unease behind. Ellie caught up with Marcus in the hallway. "That was bold," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and worry. "I'm tired of staying quiet," Marcus replied. If they can talk, so can I. After school, Marcus stayed late to work on a project in the art room. The space was quiet, sunlight streaming through the large windows as he sketched the lines of a futuristic building. The sound of footsteps broke his concentration. Looking up, he saw Greg leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You got a lot to say in class," Greg said, his voice low. Marcus set his pencil down, meeting Greg's gaze. "I'm not afraid of you." Greg chuckled, stepping closer. "You should be. You think you can just waltz in here, run your mouth, and there won't be consequences." Marcus stood, his heart pounding. "This isn't about me. It's about you not liking what I stand for." "What you stand for?" Greg sneered. "You don't stand for anything. You're just a loudmouth who doesn't know his place." The tension crackled between them. Before Marcus could respond, a voice interrupted. "Everything okay here?" It was Mr. Harper, standing in the hallway. Greg straightened, his expression quickly shifting to feigned innocence. "Just talking, right, Marcus?" Marcus didn't answer. He watched as Greg sauntered off, his confidence unshaken. That evening, Marcus walked through Willow Creek's downtown, the streets bathed in the golden light of sunset. He stopped in front of a mural depicting the town's founding, a sprawling scene of farmers and tradesmen, but not a single black face among them. The mural felt like a lie, a sanitized version of history that erased people like Marcus's ancestors who had built so much of the town. As he stood there, lost in thought, an older man approached. Mr. Davis, the town barber, was a fixture in the community, his wisdom sought after by many. "Thinking hard, young man?" Mr. Davis asked, leaning on his cane. Marcus nodded. "Just wondering if things here will ever change." Mr. Davis chuckled softly. "Change is slow, like carving stone. It takes time and pressure. You're part of that pressure, Marcus. Don't stop pushing." The words stayed with Marcus as he walked home, the weight of the day settling over him. The next day, a flyer circulated through Willow Creek High. Printed in bold letters, it read, "Stand Together Against Hate, Community Meeting at Civic Center, Friday at 6 p.m. Marcus recognized the group organizing it, a local chapter of an advocacy organization focused on equality and justice. Ellie caught up with Marcus between classes, holding one of the flyers. "Did you see this? They're asking people to share their stories. You should speak." Marcus hesitated, glancing around the crowded hallway. "I don't know. What if it just makes things worse?" "It might," Ellie admitted. "But what if it doesn't? What if it actually changes something?" Before Marcus could respond, Greg walked by, snatching the flyer from Ellie's hand. "What's this?" he sneered. "A pity party?" Ellie glared at him. "It's a call for justice. Not that you'd know anything about that." Greg laughed, crumpling the flyer and tossing it into a trash can. Justice is what people who can't handle the real world cry about. Marcus stepped between Greg and Ellie. "You can laugh all you want, Greg, but you can't stop this." Greg leaned in, his voice low. "Watch me." By Thursday evening, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. He had agreed to speak at the meeting, but now that the time was near, doubt crept in. "What if I say the wrong thing?" he muttered to himself. Samuel knocked on the door and entered, a cup of tea in his hand. "Mind some company?" Marcus shrugged, gesturing to the chair by the bed. His father sat down, placing the tea on the nightstand. "You've got something on your mind," Samuel said. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Marcus admitted. What if I mess up? What if I just make things worse? Samuel smiled faintly. You're not going to fix the world in one speech, son. But if your words make one person stop and think, it's worth it. Marcus nodded, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. Thanks, Dad. Now, Samuel said, standing, write what's in your heart. That's all anyone can ask. The Civic Centre was packed Friday evening. Folding chairs filled the large room, and more people stood in the back, their faces a mixture of curiosity and determination. Marcus sat in the front row with Ellie and his parents, the paper in his hand crumpled from nervous fidgeting. The meeting began with speeches from local leaders, each one addressing the importance of standing against racism and creating a more inclusive community. Finally, Marcus's name was called. He stood, his heart pounding as he approached the podium. The crowd's murmurs fell silent, all eyes on him. I didn't plan to be here tonight, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I didn't plan to speak out. But when you face something wrong, staying silent feels like letting it win. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning familiar faces, his classmates, teachers, neighbors. Willow Creek is my home. But for people like me, it hasn't always felt like one. I've been told to stay quiet, to not cause trouble. But what kind of home is it if you can't feel safe? If you can't feel equal? Applause broke out, but Marcus wasn't finished. This isn't about me, it's about making sure the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles we are. It's about recognizing that staying silent is its own kind of violence. As he finished, the room erupted in applause. Marcus stepped back, his breath shaky, but his heart light. He met his father's gaze in the crowd, seeing pride shining in his eyes. That night, as Marcus walked home with Ellie, they noticed spray-painted words on the school's outer wall. Traitors, go home. Ellie's face darkened. They're scared, she said. That's why they lash out. Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath his skin. Let them be scared, we're not stopping. But as they walked on, the weight of the words followed them, a reminder that the fight was far from over. In the following days, the community meeting became the talk of Willow Creek. Local papers published Marcus's speech, and students began wearing ribbons in solidarity with his cause. But the resistance also grew louder. Greg and his friends began circulating their own flyers filled with divisive rhetoric. Enough of this nonsense, the flyers read. Keep Willow Creek as it's always been. At lunch, Marcus found one of the flyers stuffed in his locker. He tore it up, determination flashing in his eyes. If they think this will scare me, they don't know me at all. The next morning, Mr. Harper's history class was unusually quiet. Marcus took his seat, feeling the weight of the room's unease. As students settled, Mr. Harper stood at the front, a copy of the local paper in hand. Let's address the elephant in the room, Mr. Harper began, his tone serious. Marcus, I read your speech in the paper. Powerful words. This town needs voices like yours. Marcus glanced around the room. Some students nodded in support, while others, like Greg, exchanged glares and whispers. Greg raised his hand, a smug look on his face. So, are we just supposed to ignore the fact that Marcus is dividing the school? Division doesn't come from people speaking up, Marcus shot back, unable to stay silent. It comes from people refusing to listen. All right, that's enough, Mr. Harper said, stepping in. This is a history class, not a debate hall. Let's focus on today's lesson. But as Mr. Harper turned to write on the board, Marcus felt the tension simmering, an invisible line drawn between him and some of his classmates. Later that afternoon, as Marcus walked home, a patrol car pulled up beside him. Sheriff Stanton stepped out, his towering figure casting a long shadow. "Afternoon, Marcus," Stanton said, his voice calm but cold. "Sheriff?" Marcus replied, keeping his tone neutral. Stanton leaned against the car, his hand resting casually on his belt. "You're quite the talk of the town these days." Marcus didn't respond, his pulse quickening. "I just wanted to remind you," Stanton continued, his gaze steady. "This is a small town. People don't like troublemakers." Marcus met his eyes, his voice unwavering. "Speaking the truth isn't troublemaking."
Stanton smiled faintly. "That depends on whose truth you're talking about."
As the sheriff drove away, Marcus stood rooted to the spot, a mixture of anger and unease coursing through him. The backlash against Marcus extended beyond the school. At the local grocery store, his mother, Clara, overheard whispers as she shopped. "Green's boy is stirring up trouble," one woman muttered. "What did they expect?" another replied. "That family doesn't know its place." Clara gripped her shopping cart tightly, her face composed, but her heart aching. That evening, she sat with Marcus at the kitchen table. "This isn't just about you anymore," she said softly. "They're targeting all of us." Marcus looked down at his hands, guilt creeping in. "I didn't mean to bring this on you." Clara shook her head. "This fight chose you, Marcus, and we're with you. But you need to understand the weight of what you're carrying." A few days later, during lunch, the cafeteria erupted into chaos. A group of students wearing solidarity ribbons clashed with Greg's supporters. Heated words escalated into shoving, and soon trays and drinks were flying. Marcus and Ellie rushed to intervene. "Stop this!" Marcus yelled, stepping between the groups.
But before he could say more, a teacher blew a whistle and the room fell silent. The principal stormed in, her face red with anger.
"In my office now!" she barked, pointing at Marcus, Greg, and several others. Principal Dawes sat behind her desk, her fingers steepled as she glared at the group of students. "This behavior is unacceptable," she began. "Our school will not tolerate violence." Greg spoke first, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "I was just defending myself. Marcus's friends started it." "That's a lie," Ellie snapped. Dawes silenced her with a raised hand. "Enough. Both of you are suspended for a week. The rest of you will receive detention." Marcus stood, his voice rising. "You're punishing both sides. Greg and his friends have been harassing us for weeks."
"And now you've escalated it," Dawes said firmly. "If you want respect, Mr. Green, you need to earn it." Marcus left the office, his frustration boiling over. "They want us to stay silent," he said to Ellie. "But I'm done with that." Word of the incident spread quickly. At home that evening, Marcus received a message from an unlikely source, Sarah, one of Greg's teammates.
"I need to talk to you," it read. Curious but wary, Marcus met her at the local library after hours. Sarah looked nervous, glancing around as if afraid of being seen.
"I can't stand what Greg's doing," she admitted. "It's wrong. But if I speak out, I'll lose everything. My friends, my spot on the team." "You don't have to lose anything," Marcus said gently. "But if you stand with us, you'll gain more than you think." Sarah nodded slowly, her resolve building. "I'll think about it."
The Monday after the cafeteria incident, Marcus found himself called into Mr. Harper's classroom after school. The history teacher sat at his desk, grading papers, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Marcus," Harper said without looking up. Marcus hesitated but complied. "If this is about the fight, I didn't start it."
"I know," Harper interrupted, setting down his pen. "I also know this school has been failing students like you for a long time." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "Then why don't you do something about it?"
Harper sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not as simple as you think. Change here is slow. People resist it." "That doesn't mean we stop trying," Marcus countered. Harper smiled faintly. "You remind me of myself when I was your age. Angry, full of ideas, convinced I could change everything overnight." Marcus crossed his arms. "And now?" "Now I know change is a marathon, not a sprint," Harper replied. "But people like you, Marcus, are the ones who keep us moving forward." The words lingered as Marcus left the room, a flicker of validation among the turmoil. That evening, the Green family gathered around the dinner table. The mood was tense, the weight of recent events hanging over them. "I saw the spray paint on the school wall," Marcus's older sister Tanya said, her tone sharp. "This isn't just about you, Marcus. It's affecting all of us." "Don't you think I know that?" Marcus shot back. "You think I don't see how people look at us, how they treat us?" "Enough," Samuel said firmly, silencing the argument. "We don't tear each other down in this house." Clara reached for Marcus's hand. "We're proud of you, son. But you need to think carefully about your next steps. They're watching, waiting for you to slip." Marcus nodded, the weight of their words pressing on him. "I just want things to be different for all of us." The tension in Willow Creek boiled over at a town council meeting later that week. The civic centre was packed, standing room only, as residents voiced their opinions. "This is ridiculous," one man shouted. "We've never had these problems before." "That's because no one spoke up before," Ellie countered from the audience. Greg's father, Sheriff Stanton, stood at the podium, his voice calm but firm. "We need to restore order. This town has always been a place of peace. Let's not let outsiders disrupt that." Marcus stood, his heart pounding. "We're not outsiders. We've been here all along. You just didn't see us." The room erupted into shouts, the divide clearer than ever. As the meeting ended, Marcus realized the battle wasn't just against individuals, it was against an entire mindset. Despite the backlash, Marcus began to see small signs of change. A group of students formed a solidarity club, meeting after school to discuss ways to foster inclusivity. Ellie brought snacks while Marcus led discussions on how to address systemic issues within the school. One afternoon, Sarah walked in, hesitant but determined. "I want to help," she said. "Greg doesn't speak for all of us." The group welcomed her, and slowly more students began joining, some out of curiosity, others out of conviction. Marcus received a surprise visitor one evening, Mr. Davis, the barber. The older man sat on the porch, his cane tapping softly against the wooden planks. "You've stirred up quite the storm," Davis said, a twinkle in his eye. Marcus smiled ruefully. "That wasn't my goal." "No," Davis said, "but it's what was needed. People like you and me, we've had to push against the tide our whole lives. But you've got something I didn't have when I was your age, a voice that people are starting to listen to." Davis handed Marcus an envelope. "Take this. It's a donation from the community. Use it to fund whatever you and your friends are planning." Marcus opened the envelope, his eyes widening at the small stack of bills inside. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep going," Davis replied, his smile warm. The next morning, Marcus found posters for the Solidarity Club torn down from the hallways, replaced with crude, hateful messages. The sight made his stomach churn. Ellie stormed into the club's meeting that afternoon. "This is unacceptable. We should report it." "And then what?" Marcus asked. "They'll just keep doing it." Sarah spoke up. "Maybe that's the point. If they're trying this hard to scare us, it means we're making a difference." Marcus nodded, a spark of determination reigniting. "Then we keep going." Inspired by Mr. Davis's donation and the growing support from the community, Marcus proposed a bold idea during the next Solidarity Club meeting. "What if we create something that represents the change we want to see?" Marcus began, standing before the group. "A mural, a real one this time, something that includes everyone and tells the truth about our town."
The room buzzed with excitement. Ellie grinned. "That's brilliant. It'll be like reclaiming the space." Sarah nodded, but her expression was cautious. "You know Greg and his crowd won't let this slide." Marcus shrugged. "They'll try to tear it down, but we'll build it stronger." The group spent the next few days designing the mural, incorporating ideas from everyone. Marcus's sketches formed the base, a vivid depiction of unity, struggle, and hope. The mural would cover an old, crumbling wall on the edge of downtown, a space often overlooked, much like the voices Marcus hoped to amplify. The project gained momentum with volunteers from the community helping to clear the wall and prepare it for painting. But one night, as Marcus walked past the site on his way home, he froze. Graffiti covered their freshly primed wall. "Stay in your place." The words, scrawled in red paint, felt like a punch to the gut. Marcus stood there, his fists clenched, the weight of exhaustion and anger pressing down on him. "Cowards," Ellie said, appearing behind him. She had seen the same on her way home and came to check on him. "They're scared," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "And they should be." Ellie tilted her head. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we start painting tomorrow," Marcus said. "We don't stop for them." The next day, the group arrived early, armed with brushes, paint cans, and determination. Marcus led the charge, sketching the outline on the wall as others began filling in colours. Passers-by stopped to watch, some offering words of encouragement, others glaring disapprovingly. The mural began to take shape. Hands of different colours intertwined, a sunrise breaking through storm clouds, and the phrase, "Together we rise," written boldly across the top. As they worked, Greg drove by with his friends, their truck slowing to a crawl. He leaned out the window, smirking. "Nice picture, Green. Too bad it won't last." Marcus didn't respond, focusing on his brushstrokes. Ellie, however, shot Greg a glare. "We'll see about that." A few days later, Marcus was called into Principal Dawes' office. She leaned forward, her expression severe. "This mural of yours is stirring up tension," Dawes said. "I've received complaints from parents." "It's stirring up conversation," Marcus corrected. "That's the point." Dawes sighed. "I understand what you're trying to do, Marcus, but you need to consider the bigger picture. This could escalate." Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady. "It's already escalated. Pretending it hasn't doesn't solve anything." For a moment, Dawes looked at him, her stern facade cracking slightly. "Be careful, Marcus. Change is a dangerous thing in a town like this." The mural's progress became a flashpoint in the town.
Articles appeared in the local paper, some praising the initiative, others condemning it as divisive. At school, students debated openly in the hallways, tensions simmering. One afternoon, Marcus overheard a heated exchange between two students near the lockers. "Why can't they just leave things the way they are?" one boy said. "Because the way things are isn't fair," a girl shot back. "Marcus is just saying what we're all thinking." The boys scoffed. "Not everyone's thinking that." Marcus walked away, the conversation echoing in his mind. The mural was achieving its goal, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths, but the pushback was relentless. One evening, Marcus and Ellie arrived early to continue painting. As they approached the site, they spotted two figures by the wall, spray cans in hand. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, breaking into a run. The vandals, two boys from Greg's crowd, dropped the cans and fled. Ellie picked up one of the cans, her hands trembling with anger. They were trying to ruin everything. "They won't," Marcus said, his voice calm. "We'll fix it." That night, the group stayed late, repairing the damage and adding extra layers of paint. The mural's message grew stronger, its colors more vivid, as if defying the attempts to silence it. The next day, during a school assembly, a teacher presented the mural as part of an art initiative. The auditorium buzzed with mixed reactions. Greg stood abruptly, his voice loud and angry. "Why should we celebrate something that divides us?" Before Marcus could respond, Sarah rose from her seat. "It's not dividing us. It's showing us what's wrong so we can fix it."
The room fell silent as Sarah continued. "You might not like it, Greg, but some of us want Willow Creek to be better." Marcus looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. For the first time, he felt the tide beginning to turn.
A week later, Marcus and Ellie arrived at the mural site early in the morning. The entire wall had been transformed into a vibrant display of unity, its colors bold and unyielding. But something was different today. A crowd had gathered at the foot of the mural. As Marcus and Ellie approached, they realized that the crowd wasn't hostile. Most of the people were standing quietly, some with tears in their eyes, others whispering among themselves. "Is this—" Ellie began, but her words faltered.
Marcus stepped forward, squinting at the large canvas. A new addition had been painted overnight. A black family, Marcus's family, standing in the center of the mural, their faces looking out toward the rest of the community. Around them were hands reaching out from all directions, forming a circle. The words, "Together we rise,"
had been carefully integrated into the family's image. His chest tightened as he recognized the symbolism. It was a powerful message of inclusivity, but more importantly, it was a direct challenge to the status quo in Willow Creek. A local woman, Mrs. Whitaker, who had been standing near the mural, approached Marcus. "You did this, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Marcus started, but his words faltered. The emotions were too overwhelming. "No, I didn't paint this, but it's incredible."
"You're right," she said. "This town's been stuck for too long, and we've all ignored the cracks for too long. It's time for everyone to see what's been left out."
Ellie smiled, glancing at Marcus. "I think this is a game changer." By the following day, the mural had drawn a wave of support. Many local businesses displayed signs in support of the mural with words like, "We stand together," and "Unity in diversity," proudly hanging in windows. But not everyone shared this sentiment. At lunch, Marcus sat in the cafeteria, surrounded by whispers. Greg and his friends stormed past, their eyes filled with disdain. "That mural's a joke," Greg muttered as he passed by. It's one thing to represent people, but it's another to turn our town upside down for it. Ellie glared at him. The only thing upside down here is your attitude. Marcus stood up, his voice clear. This town is already upside down. You just don't want to admit it. Greg stopped, a dark look crossing his face. You think you're the only one who's tired of things staying the same? You think you're the only one with problems? Marcus stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Greg's. I know I'm not. But I'm not going to let people like you keep silencing those of us who want change. As Greg opened his mouth to retort, the bell rang. The moment passed, but Marcus knew the battle was far from over. That evening, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the sketches for his next architectural project. The school suspension and the growing divide in the town weighed heavily on him. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. They're organizing a rally tomorrow. You in? Marcus sighed, his fingers hovering over the keys before replying. What's the rally for? To keep the mural up and get the town to stop hiding behind its racism. The words hit him like a wave. He had already taken so many risks, but this felt like the point of no return. I'm in. The rally took place the next afternoon, just outside the school. The weather was warm, and the air was thick with anticipation. Marcus stood at the front of the crowd, his chest tight, as the speakers took the stage one by one. Sarah spoke first. We're not asking for special treatment, we're asking for respect, for the right to exist as equals in this town, and we're asking for the chance to change things together. The crowd cheered, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. He wasn't standing alone anymore. They were standing with him. Then Greg appeared, standing across from the group with his own crew. This is just a bunch of nonsense, Greg shouted, his voice laced with anger. We're fine the way we are. You're making things worse. Marcus stepped forward, his voice ringing out across the crowd. I'm not trying to make things worse. I'm trying to make things right. Greg sneered. You think you can just change everything? This is how it's always been, and that's how it'll stay. You've had your way for long enough, Marcus said. It's time to make room for everyone else. The tension between them was palpable, but before it could escalate, the sheriff's patrol car rolled into view, its lights flashing. Sheriff Stanton stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning the crowd. This rally's getting out of hand, he said gruffly, his gaze landing on Marcus.
What do you mean? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. We're exercising our right to protest.
You're causing trouble, Stanton said flatly, his voice cold. And if you keep pushing, there will be consequences. The crowd murmured in disbelief, the atmosphere turning electric. Ellie moved toward Marcus, her voice a whisper. We've got to keep going, we can't let him scare us. Marcus met her gaze, feeling a sense of resolve take root. We're not backing down. It's beautiful, Mrs. Whitaker said, her voice thick with emotion. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen something like this. It feels real, like you're finally seen. Marcus stood there, taking in the image of his family immortalized in paint, his mother, father, and siblings, all captured in the mural with pride and strength. It was a moment that spoke louder than words ever could. The unity they had fought for, the change they had longed for, was finally beginning to materialize. Ellie stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You didn't just paint this, Marcus, she said softly. You made it happen. You gave this town something to hold on to.
Marcus swallowed. trying to hold back the flood of emotions. This isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's been overlooked, everyone who's been told to stay in their place. As more people arrived, they began to stand before the mural in reverence, their heads bowed or eyes glistening with tears. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the struggle and the progress that had been made.
The next day, Marcus was summoned to the town hall. The town council had called an emergency meeting to address the mural's impact. As he entered the room, he could feel the weight of everyone's gaze, some admiring, others wary. "Marcus Green," the mayor began, her voice stern but measured. "This mural has sparked a lot of discussion in our town. While we acknowledge your right to express your views, it has also caused significant tension." Marcus stood tall, looking around at the council members. The room was divided, with some supporting him and others clearly uncomfortable with the boldness of the mural. "You're telling me that painting a mural about unity is causing tension?" Marcus asked, incredulous. The mayor cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "It's not just the mural itself, it's the message behind it. People are worried that this will cause further division."
Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with passion. "It's not division, it's visibility. People have been pushed to the sidelines for too long. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's time they felt that discomfort. This town has to face its history." The room fell into a heavy silence. The mayor glanced at the sheriff, who sat at the back of the room, his arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face.
"You're pushing the boundaries, Marcus," the sheriff finally spoke, his tone calm but sharp. "This is a small town, and small towns don't change overnight." "That's the problem," Marcus said, his voice rising. "They should
Change! We're all part of this town. Black lives, white lives, every life in between. It's time for everyone to be seen, not just the ones who've always had power." As the debate continued, Marcus knew that things were about to escalate. That evening, after the meeting, he received a text from Sarah.
"They're planning something. Greg and his friends are organizing a protest against the mural tomorrow." Marcus's heart sank. He had known the resistance wouldn't just fade away, but the thought of a full-blown protest was overwhelming. "That's it, huh?" Marcus said aloud, pacing in his room. "They think they can just shut us down." Ellie, who had been sitting quietly on his bed, spoke up. "They've been fighting this the whole time, Marcus. This isn't just about the mural, it's about control. About who gets to decide what's acceptable." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of their struggle. But there was no turning back now. He wasn't just fighting for his voice, he was fighting for everyone who had been silenced for too long. The next day, a crowd gathered outside the mural. On one side stood Marcus, Ellie, and their supporters, holding signs that read, "Equality for all," and "Our voices matter." On the other side, Greg and his friends stood, some holding Confederate flags, others shouting slogans that echoed with hate. The atmosphere was tense. People gathered, some whispering, some shouting, as the two groups stood facing each other. Marcus's stomach twisted as he looked at Greg, whose eyes were filled with disdain. "Marcus!" Greg called, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're tearing this town apart. You don't belong here."
"I'm not tearing anything apart," Marcus shouted back. "I'm standing up for what's right." "You're dividing us," Greg sneered. "We've never needed this kind of disruption."
"Maybe you
"Haven't needed it," Marcus retorted, his voice unwavering. "But we have, and we're done staying quiet." Ellie stood beside him, her expression resolute. "We're here to stay, and so is this mural."
The crowd shifted uneasily, and for a moment Marcus wondered if they might be able to shift the tide, But just as he thought things might de-escalate, a bottle shattered near the mural, thrown from the opposing side. "Enough!" the sheriff shouted, stepping forward. "Everyone, calm down!" But the damage was done. The protest had turned violent. People began shouting, pushing, and the sound of angry voices filled the air. In the days following the protest, the town was split. The mural had become the focal point of everything, the symbol of resistance and, for many, a painful reminder of the change they feared. But despite the violence and hatred that had erupted, Marcus felt a quiet sense of pride. A small group of supporters gathered every day in front of the mural, defending it from further damage, making sure the message remained. The mural had become more than just a piece of art. It had become a battleground, a space of ongoing resistance. Marcus sat on the porch with Mr. Davis, his old mentor. The barber sat in his usual chair, cleaning his clippers. "They've tried to tear it down, haven't they?" Mr. Davis asked, his eyes focused on his work. "Yeah," Marcus replied. "But it's not about the mural anymore. It's about what it represents." "Exactly," Davis said with a smile. "You can't stop a tide once it starts rolling, and you've started something big, Marcus. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking up at the mural. "It feels like we're just getting started." The days following the protest were filled with tension and uncertainty. Marcus spent his time divided between school, his growing involvement in the community, and working on his future plans. His head constantly swirled with thoughts of the mural, the protest, and the voices that still resisted change. One afternoon he took a walk through Willow Creek, hoping to clear his mind. He passed the old, weathered houses that lined the streets, the same houses that had stood for generations, bearing witness to both progress and stagnation. As Marcus walked, he thought about what Mr. Davis had said. "You can't stop a tide once it starts rolling." That was the hope he was clinging to now. His family, the community that had rallied around him, and even some of his classmates, they were all starting to see that change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. He passed by the mural again. Despite the previous violence, the wall stood tall, its colours vibrant and defiant. It was no longer just a painting on a wall. It had become a symbol of the ongoing struggle for justice. Marcus stood in front of the mural for a long moment, taking in the intricate details, the hands reaching out to one another, the faces of his family looking back at him with pride. And then, as if the mural itself was alive, he felt the weight of the years of silence and oppression melt away, replaced by something new. Later that evening, Marcus met with Ellie at their usual spot by the town's old fountain. The air was cooler now, the sun setting behind them. "So, what now?" Ellie asked, breaking the silence between them. Marcus sat on the stone ledge of the fountain, his hands resting on his knees. "We keep going, we keep fighting. The mural is just the beginning."
Ellie nodded, her eyes searching his face. "Do you think things will ever change? I mean, really change?"
Marcus thought for a moment. "I don't know, but I know that I can't be the only one asking for it anymore. I'm not alone. The people who were scared before, they're starting to speak up, and the ones who want to stop us, they're realizing that they can't." Ellie smiled softly. "You know, you've got a lot of people behind you now." Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. "We've got each other, and that's all that matters." Later that evening, Marcus met with Ellie at their usual spot by the town's old fountain. The air was cooler now, the sun setting behind them. "So, what now?" Ellie asked, breaking the silence between them.
Marcus sat on the stone ledge of the fountain, his hands resting on his knees. We keep going. We keep fighting. The mural is just the beginning.
Ellie nodded, her eyes searching his face. Do you think things will ever change? I mean, really change? Marcus thought for a moment. I don't know, but I know that I can't be the only one asking for it anymore. I'm not alone. The people who were scared before, they're starting to speak up. And the ones who want to stop us, they're realizing that they can't. Ellie smiled softly. You know, you've got a lot of people behind you now.
Marcus met her gaze, his eyes steady. We've got each other, and that's all that matters.
After the town hall meeting, things began to change, albeit slowly. The mural remained, standing tall as a testament to resistance and resilience. But more importantly, Marcus began to see subtle shifts in the people around him. One afternoon, as he walked to class, he saw a group of students wearing the solidarity ribbons again, this time with more students joining in. It wasn't just Ellie and Sarah anymore. A dozen students, maybe more, now wore the ribbons proudly, a quiet but powerful statement. In one of his classes, a teacher who had once been distant and indifferent to the ongoing struggles approached him. I read your speech at the council meeting, she said, her voice tentative. I didn't know how deeply this town needed to change. Marcus smiled, his heart light. It's okay. It's about opening up the conversation. It's the first step. After the town hall meeting, things began to change, albeit slowly. The mural remained, standing tall as a testament to resistance and resilience. But more importantly, Marcus began to see subtle shifts in the people around him. One afternoon, as he walked to class, he saw a group of students wearing the solidarity ribbons again, this time with more students joining in. It wasn't just Ellie and Sarah anymore. A dozen students, maybe more, now wore the ribbons proudly, a quiet but powerful statement. In one of his classes, a teacher who had once been distant and indifferent to the ongoing struggles approached him. I read your speech at the council meeting, she said, her voice tentative. I didn't know how deeply this town needed to change.
Marcus smiled, his heart light. It's okay. It's about opening up the conversation. It's the first step. Weeks later, the mural remained intact, a symbol of resilience in the heart of Willow Creek. There were still whispers in the streets, still small acts of defiance from those who opposed it. But the mural wasn't just a piece of art. It had become a landmark for those who sought change. Marcus stood in front of it again, this time with his family. The mural seemed even more vibrant now, reflecting not just the struggle, but the hope of the community. As the sun set behind them, Marcus turned to his father. You were right, Dad. This is only the beginning. Samuel smiled, his hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. I think it's more than that, son. I think this town's beginning to see itself for the first time.
And in that moment, with the mural standing tall behind him, Marcus felt a sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but for the first time he felt the tide of change beginning to move in their favor. The fight for equality was still ongoing, but Marcus knew that change had already begun. Willow Creek would never be the same. His voice, the voice of so many who had been silenced, had broken through. And while the road ahead would be filled with challenges, Marcus was no longer afraid of the fight, because now, more than ever, he understood what it meant to truly stand for something.